Canada and Mexico announced plans on Saturday to tax U.S. goods in retaliation to sweeping new 25% tariffs ordered by U.S. President Donald Trump on imports from their countries. It's a move economists say could lead to a trade war that risks reigniting inflation, with Trump also ordering a 10% tax on products from China.
Canada just dropped a bomb on U.S. agriculture, and no one in Washington saw it coming. In a move that's already rattling trade corridors across the northern border, the Canadian government has announced $28 billion worth of retaliatory tariffs specifically targeting American agricultural exports. And make no mistake, this isn't just a policy dispute. It's a carefully calculated response to what Canadian trade officials are calling a blatant violation of cross-border trade agreements, and it's threatening to wipe out billions in revenue from key U.S. farming states. We're talking about steep, painful levies on soybeans, wheat, corn, dairy, poultry, pork, and processed food exports. Industries already struggling under inflation, drought, and global market volatility. Now, they're being choked off at the Canadian border, one of America's top 3 ag export destinations. What triggered this crisis? It traces back to a new U.S. subsidy package, quietly passed with bipartisan support, that offered enhanced protections and payouts to American farmers, especially in battleground states like Iowa and Wisconsin. But here's the kicker. Canada says that subsidy plan gives U.S. farmers an unfair advantage and undermines long-standing commitments under USMCA, the updated NAFTA deal. And they're not just issuing warnings. These tariffs are being enforced right now. Shipments have already been turned back at multiple ports, while rail and truck deliveries have been stalled or rerouted. Major Canadian food distributors are reportedly freezing all U.S. purchases until further notice, and several American exporters say contracts worth tens of millions have been abruptly canceled. Meanwhile, political pressure is boiling in D.C. Farmers are flooding congressional hotlines. State agriculture boards are demanding emergency relief. Republican and Democrat lawmakers, many of whom backed the original subsidy bill, are scrambling to contain the fallout. But Ottawa isn't backing down. In fact, a leaked memo from the Canadian Ministry of Trade, reviewed by CBC and later confirmed by Bloomberg, states clearly, "We will escalate until the United States recognizes and reverses its trade-distorting measures. No exemptions will be granted." That means this isn't a one-time slap. It's the opening shot in what could become a prolonged, bruising trade war. And the implications are bigger than just Canada. Other trading partners, including Mexico and the EU, are now watching closely, with sources inside Brussels suggesting the European Commission is actively reviewing its own list of countermeasures. What starts with Canadian retaliation could snowball into a full-scale rejection of U.S. agricultural dominance worldwide. And if that happens, American farmers won't just lose a trade deal, they'll lose access to the very markets keeping them afloat. This tariff retaliation isn't just economic, it's political warfare with scalpel precision. Canada didn't just throw out random numbers, they surgically targeted the exact U.S. states and districts that rely heavily on agricultural exports to Canada, especially those where the 2026 midterms and even the presidential race could swing. Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota, and Wisconsin are now directly in the crosshairs, with local economies facing potential multi-billion-dollar losses over the next year. And it's no coincidence. Canadian officials are fully aware that disrupting these areas doesn't just hurt farmers, it stirs political backlash against the very lawmakers who backed the subsidy policies that sparked this retaliation in the first place. What makes this even more dangerous is the timing. The U.S. agriculture sector is already on life support from falling global demand, high input costs, and volatile energy prices. For many family-owned farms, Canada was one of the few stable buyers left. Now, that safety net is gone. This isn't like China's tariffs years ago where the U.S. found alternate buyers. Canada is a geographically close, integrated partner. You can't just replace that kind of cross-border supply chain overnight. And when the Canadian government says no exemptions will be granted, that includes even essential goods and perishables, meaning tons of fresh produce and dairy are now stuck in limbo. Inside Ottawa, this is being hailed as a measured but firm response, not just to the subsidies, but to what they call the US's pattern of agricultural aggression. And within Canadian media and farming lobbies, there's overwhelming support for the tariffs, framing them as a necessary stand for fair play in a market long dominated by American muscle. Meanwhile, US officials are trying to dial things down, with reports suggesting quiet back-channel talks between Biden's trade reps and Canadian ministers. But so far, Ottawa isn't budging. If anything, they're preparing for escalation. Within hours of Canada's announcement, the ripple effects hit Washington like a shockwave. Lawmakers from both parties, especially those from agricultural states, rushed to emergency meetings, demanding answers from the White House. Republican senators from the Midwest accused the Biden administration of reckless economic mismanagement, blaming them for triggering this retaliation through unchecked subsidy programs. But it wasn't just Republicans. Several key Democratic House members facing re-election in rural districts also publicly criticized the administration, warning that these tariffs could cripple local economies and destroy our competitive edge. Behind closed doors, insiders say the National Economic Council is scrambling to assemble a damage control strategy. But the options are limited, and time is running out. And while Washington scrambles, the international reaction is even more telling. European leaders, already wary of American protectionism, are reportedly considering similar moves, with whispers of the EU revisiting long-suspended agricultural tariffs in solidarity with Canada. Mexico's government also issued a veiled warning, stating they will not tolerate unfair market manipulation, signaling they might follow Canada's lead if talks don't de-escalate. In short, the US isn't just dealing with one angry neighbor, it's at risk of facing a coordinated global backlash over its agricultural and subsidy policies. And the markets are watching. Futures for corn, soybeans, and wheat all dipped sharply following the announcement, with analysts warning this may just be the beginning of a much deeper trade slide. And later in this video, you'll see how Elon Musk and a coalition of tech CEOs are secretly pushing for a digital trade workaround to bypass these restrictions entirely, and why it could blow up in their faces. But back in the capital, panic is setting in. The American Farm Bureau called the tariffs catastrophic, warning that tens of thousands of jobs are now at risk. And with the Canadian government refusing to even entertain negotiations until the US repeals the subsidies, this isn't ending soon. If Washington doesn't move fast, the situation could spiral into a full-blown trade war, one that hits red and blue states alike, just in time for the 2026 election cycle. While US media frames this as a knee-jerk retaliation, internal documents leaked from Canada's Ministry of International Trade tell a very different story. According to a newly surfaced briefing memo marked "Confidential, Eyes Only," this tariff package was months in the making. Canadian officials had been quietly modeling various scenarios, waiting for the right moment to strike, and the moment Washington expanded its agri-subsidy program, Ottawa pulled the trigger. The leak suggests this isn't just about protecting Canadian farmers. It's about reshaping the entire power dynamic of North American trade. One senior Canadian analyst quoted in the memo said bluntly, "We've played defense for too long. This is our offensive turn." Behind the scenes, Prime Minister Trudeau's administration has been coordinating closely with trade officials from the EU, Japan, and even Australia, crafting a potential multilateral front against US export dominance. The leaked files also reveal a secondary target: undermining US influence at the upcoming World Trade Forum, where Canada now plans to propose new rules aimed at curbing state-distorted agricultural markets. If adopted, these could directly challenge how the US funds and protects its farming sector. stripping Washington of one of its most powerful economic levers. But the boldest part? Canada is reportedly betting that rural political pressure will force Washington's hand long before a single negotiation table is set. According to the memo, their economists predict that if just 5 key swing states see double-digit ag losses by year's end, it could reshape legislative behavior overnight. In other words, this isn't just about wheat or corn, it's about using U.S. politics against itself. And we're not done yet. In the next segment, we'll expose how one leaked Zoom call between Canadian trade leaders and European lobbyists could signal the start of an economic alliance that freezes America out of its own markets. The fallout from Canada's $28 billion tariff strike is already rippling beyond the farms. Just hours after the announcement, agri-tech stocks plummeted on Wall Street, with companies like Deere & Company, Tyson Foods, and Archer Daniels Midland shedding billions in combined market value. But this wasn't just panic selling. Leaked investor memos show that hedge funds are now pricing in long-term geopolitical risk in the U.S. food export sector. One analyst from Morgan Stanley bluntly stated, "This is no longer a trade dispute. This is an organized decoupling, and it's already affecting venture capital. Silicon Valley firms that once flooded Midwest ag tech startups with cash are now freezing funding rounds, fearing this conflict could linger for years." Meanwhile, the Biden administration is facing a ticking clock. According to insiders, several governors from key agricultural states have already demanded emergency subsidies to offset the projected $12 billion in lost exports by Q4. The White House is reportedly considering a stimulus package, but doing so could violate the very WTO rules the U.S. accuses others of breaking. It's a trap, and everyone knows it. Behind closed doors, a quiet panic is setting in. Washington's playbook, threaten, subsidize, dominate, is unraveling, and Canada just proved it's no longer afraid to flip the script. But perhaps the most overlooked reaction is happening at the grassroots level. Farmer associations in Iowa, Kansas, and Missouri are organizing emergency town halls, demanding answers from lawmakers who sold them promises of trade dominance. The political blowback could be severe and fast. With primaries looming and rural discontent boiling, both parties now face a lose-lose scenario. Either cave to Canada or risk losing the very base that props up America's agricultural empire. So what happens now? Canada's move didn't just trigger a trade war. It exposed the fragility of America's export economy and the limits of Washington's global leverage. Whether the U.S. retaliates with more tariffs, files complaints at the WTO, or tries backroom diplomacy, one thing is clear. This isn't going away quietly. And that's why you need to stay locked in. This story's just getting started, and the next moves could change global trade forever. Subscribe for more real breakdowns. No fluff, no filters, just the facts they don't want you to hear.